My daughter turns 12 in a few months. It's her Shnat Bat Mitzvah, the year she becomes a daughter of commandments. Our upcoming milestone has made me think a lot about my own Bat Mitzvah. I grew up in the States, my daughter in Israel. I grew up a Jew, my daughter is an Israeli. It was very clear that my Bat Mitzvah would take place in a synagogue. My daughter barely knows what a synagogue is. To prepare for my Bat Mitzvah, my mom drove me over to our rabbi's house every week for months to sit in his office with the door open while he droned my haftarah at me. My mom would sit in the living room drinking tea and making small talk with the rabbi's wife. It must have been weird for my mom to sit there. My mom grew up on 2 kibbutzim. She didn't know that kids slept at their parents' houses until she turned 18. She didn't know what a checkbook was. My daughter doesn't know what one of those is either. She didn't know what a haftarah was or what prayers you say over bread or wine or Rosh Hashanah. She knew the names of the plants and what time of year they blossomed. She knew that if you saw someone else's bike outside a house that wasn't their own in the early morning, they were having an affair, and she knew not to talk about it. Even the flowers here have ears, my mother would whisper to us while strolling along the lush paths of her mother, my Savta Pnina's kibbutz. As we would walk into the Cheder Ochel on Friday night, a hush would fall over the mid-century tables, packed with diners, and heads would turn. As we shyly carried our trays laden with goulash and glasses of seltzer to Savta's favorite table, someone would manage to slip in a Ye'eli Ishmant. Words my mother would despair over for the rest of our visit. The traumas of her communal upbringing led her straight out of the kibbutz, straight into the arms of my father, a Polish-Canadian doing his postdoc at the Weizmann Institute. Straight out of Israel and straight to North America, where she figured that if she wanted her kids to speak her mother tongue, they had to go to Jewish school. She wouldn't speak it with us because then we would be different. She probably would have had an easier time connecting to other immigrants, women from China, Brazil, Senegal, Italy. Easier than making conversation with Amy Blum, with her modest cropped bob and her dowdy long skirt. Afterwards, with a freshly recorded cassette tape of Rabbi Blum droning Shmuel Bet that I would be forced to sing along with in the coming week, we would get McNuggets and eat them with barbecue sauce. More symbols of everything my mother grew up without. She grew up without a father, without religion, without her own belongings, without choice or luxuries or locked doors. The kibbutz took the accordion she was given. It had belonged to her father before he died in the War of Independence, and reappropriated it into some machsan of musical instruments to be allotted to the child with the most aptitude for playing it. That wasn't my mom. My mother grew up without everything I grew up with. Louis is growing up with everything I grew up without. To prepare for Louis' bat mitzvah, we booked flights to Japan and are researching onsens, Mount Fuji, and where to get the fluffiest pancakes by watching videos of influencers on YouTube Shorts. We don't allow her TikTok yet. We are debating whether or not to include Disneyland Tokyo in our itinerary. Louis isn't as into it, but her little sister really wants to go. Louis claims to be possibly too old for Disney. This is the year she becomes an adult, or so they say. She doesn't look like an adult to me. She looks like a baby. The top of her head smells like the day she was born. I gave birth to her in Israel. Before Israel, I didn't think I would go down the whole marriage family route. In New York, it seemed completely normal to opt out of settling down. But in Israel, I met Schechter. And ideas of marriage and family didn't seem so alien anymore. After our first date, Schechter told his mom he had met his wife. That was months before I even considered that I could be wife material. At our wedding, his mother asked me if I was pregnant. I wasn't. But a year later, I was. Louis's birth was hard and fast and had me laying on the floor of Ichilov Hospital in a pool of amniotic fluid. My mother became a mother in Birmingham, Alabama, where my big sister Libby was born. She's the only American among us. By the time I came along, my father's career had brought the three of them back to Canada, a type of North American ping pong my family would continue many times in the years to come. When my water broke, I grabbed my hospital bag and called my mom. She grabbed her suitcase and raced to Fort Worth Airport. 20 hours later, she walked into my room at Baby Lease Hotel. I have never been happier to see a human being than I was when she appeared in that doorway. Despite being born and raised in Israel, she didn't know any of the words for baby stuff in Hebrew. Tetra, tamal, minsa, arisa. I don't know those words in English. Growing up, my mother unintentionally reworded common American idioms. If eyes could shoot was one of the good ones. She got the gist, but was foggy on the particulars. In every restaurant, the waiter, hearing her accent, would ask my mom where she was from. Israel, she would say, beaming with pride. You know where that is? Usually they didn't. I can't get 3 sentences into a conversation without people interrupting me to tell me I'm American. It doesn't even matter that technically I'm not. Everyone knows what America is, where America is, and how much better, but also how much emptier, more shallow, less principled life there is. They love to tell me about their family member that lives in Jacksonville, Florida, or the time they spent doing this job or other in New York City. Usually, it's moving. They peer down their noses at me for forsaking my right to all of that convenience while simultaneously puffing up their chests that a person born and raised in the land of Trader Joe's would give up all those flavored waters to move to their small war-torn homeland. I think I was 15 when I realized my mom had an accent. She said something that annoyed me, and I repeated it back to her in a nasty teenagery mimic. As the R came rolling out my mouth, I realized that to sound like her, I had to change the way I articulated the letters. It seems stupid now, but I actually didn't understand that her being from a different country meant she sounded different. To me, she sounded like home. In my daughter's preteen warm-up to a full-blown, real-life teenage existence, she finds most of what I do in public embarrassing. Singing is forbidden, of course. Dancing is a full no. But also, eating certain foods, speaking beyond a veritable whisper, or walking with a spring in my step. This drives her crazy. But I'm not embarrassing, I say way too loudly. Savta was embarrassing. Savta was an embarrassing mom. I'm not like Savta. I'm cool. Savta was a foreigner. She had an accent. She didn't know. I feel Louis' eyes roll before I see them, and I know it. I am exactly, to a T, precisely like Savta. I am that foreigner, that accented outsider, that being whose mere presence elicits a world of questioning and confusion. The English we speak between us, albeit a far more desired language than the Hebrew my mother shielded us from, sets us apart. And the last thing the teenage mind can tolerate is being apart. Pre-teenager Louis wants to be a part of something, a part of her class, a part of her gang, not a part of the Scouts, a member of her hip-hop company. I put a distance between her and that, just like everybody else, they all strive for now. I can remember that writhing, wriggling mixture of keen self-awareness and shame that the bat mitzvah year encapsulated. Whoever chose to peg a highly public rite of passage on that supremely uncomfortable age was barbaric. My bat mitzvah was a 2-day, 3-event fiasco. It took place at our synagogue, Bethel Suburban. I swear I did not make that name up. Later, they renamed it Beth El Ner Tamid, but In my mind, it's always Bethel Suburban. I wore a cream-colored two-piece dress and bolero jacket set with Belgian lace detail that my mom took me to buy at the Botwinick's trunk show. It cost $365, which was equivalent to a small fortune in the 1990s. My mom lied about the price to my dad because that was not the kind of money our family could afford to spend on things then. I was obsessed with it until I saw Libby's dress. A brown knit maxi she bought at the French Connection on South Street. It was so chic, so urban. That Saturday morning, with shaking hands and flushed cheeks, I performed my haftarah facing down pews filled with my 7th grade class, varyingly afflicted by adolescence. My Zaidi, Louis, for whom we named our daughter, carried a Torah that had been rescued from the Holocaust around the packed room with tears in his eyes. Afterwards, we had a luncheon. Because it was Shabbos, we couldn't do the then trendy ceremony of having each important friend or family member light a candle on the menorah. Instead, each person put a flower in a vase, tying the blooming bushes of my mom's kibbutz back into the convention center-esque hall at Bethel. The next night, we had a sock hop, which is like a record hop, but everyone takes off their shoes. Monica, my mom's best friend, shipped over a box full of socks from her moshav, Yodfat, then home to a famous hosiery factory. We spruced up the luncheon hall with circus-themed decorations. There were 3 carts, hot dogs, popcorn, cotton candy, around the room. It was the weekend that Kurt Cobain died, and to my father's outrage, some of my classmates showed up wearing black armbands. I wore a pair of jean overalls, it's short overalls, and a white t-shirt that I picked out at the Gap, thinking it was the perfect coming-of-age look. We played Coke and Pepsi and adorned our wrists and ankles with those glow-in-the-dark bracelets you crack to light up. At one point in the night, in harsh contrast with the staunch introversion I had yet to shake, I requested that the DJ play the song of that year's jazz dance, backed everyone into a semicircle, and went for it. Libby and her friends, 15 at the time, safely moored on the opposite banks of puberty's raging river, stood in a clump, watching and cheering me on, and I was joyous. Oh, and if you think my bat mitzvah sounds extravagant, it can't compare to Libby's bat mitzvah. For Libby's bat mitzvah, my parents flew our closest friends and family members to Israel. They put everyone up in a hotel in Arad. We all woke up at 5 a.m., hiked up Masada, and did the Torah service in the old synagogue as the sun rose. It was very dramatic. Then we ate schnitzelonim and fries and swam in the hotel pool. You didn't want anything like that, reminds my mom over Friday night dinner. She turns to Louis and adds, she wanted an American bat mitzvah. Louis looks at me in shock. I try to silently communicate that this is not how I remember it. After all, you never get too old to roll your eyes at your mother. My parents exchange a little giggle, which I assume is prompted by the memory of my weird preteen self. For a second, everyone is tickled by the ghost of my bat mitzvah, and it's nice. But wait, says my mom, snapping us back into the here and now. You're not going to do anything in a synagogue for Louis? Nothing? Thank you.